Sorry guys, so moving right along here, I want to introduce our next speaker, and that is Benson Margulies, and he's from another great Boston-based company, that is Benson Technology. And as CTO, Benson provides technology leadership at Benson Technology. With the R&D team, he breaks ground in new technologies for the company's core products and incubator projects. He's also an active contributor to the open source software community as a member of the Apache Software Foundation, and a project management committee member of Apache Mahout and Apache CFX. And those I'm sure if you know, those are great projects, by the way. And Benson holds a degree from computer science at MIT, and he's here to talk about listening to the customer. Please welcome Benson.
So we have an interesting situation, which is that Ingo and I sort of trade places here. He just told you a good deal about the how the underlying sausages get made, and at least some things you do in text analytics. I'm going to focus more on why the heck do we do this in the first place. In some sense, this makes sense because he actually knows how the math of the underlying sausages works, whereas if you indicted me for knowing that, you probably couldn't get the grand jury to give you an indictment. So what are we doing here with all this text? I mean, typically you come to a talk and someone's talking about text analytics and they'll show you a piece of text and they'll show you names in purple or verbs in pink or something. And so what? What are we looking for in text? Well, John gave us a pretty good set of examples of things we're looking for in text. All of that social media data with lots of really given some of the examples, I'm not sure I like this word, juicy information about things happening with illness and drugs and whatnot, which, if it's available in structured data, it's available slowly and painstakingly and painfully, and it's all hiding out there in the text. The question is, how do we get our hands on it? Now, before Ingo took his side trip into how text analytics and SVM works, he was showing you a system which can extract actionable business decisions out of structured data. Your business has all of these databases. It knows about your customers. When did they interact with you last? What did they talk to you about? Was it a customer support call? How long did the call last? There's all kinds of information in there, and the beauty of predictive analytics systems is its ability to build a model that looks at that data and actually turns it into something you can do something about. And I feel like the guy in the P.G. Wodehouse story who winds up singing the same song for the fourth time and catching all the tomatoes, because I'm really about to repeat Ingo's puration about the importance of actually looking in detail at specific customers or specific events to predict something useful. Drawing big strategic curves about how many people are going to churn doesn't really pay the rent. So, philosophically speaking, though, it's all well and good to say there's stuff in the text, but what are we looking for here? And honestly, what we're looking for in text is the same thing we're looking for in everything else. We're looking for information about the world that's relevant to the business. Now, in structured data, you've got numbers of all kinds, times, dates, event ranges, prices. What have we got in the text? Well, we have... Did somebody put a goat sound effect in here somewhere for me? I could have sworn I just heard. Anyway, we've got people, locations. In a business context, brands are very important. Voice of the customer is a pervasive subject in our area. Okay, and you can find occurrences of those. Now, Ingo was showing you what you can get, and John too, by counting individual words. As we'll see, counting individual words only gets you so far. We're really looking for connections between these things. We're looking for situations where we see a brand and some information about what somebody thinks about this brand, or two brands being referenced together, or a person being referenced in a place. I spend a fair amount of my time in DC talking about much more depressing subjects where we're learning, like, who's going someplace with a weapon. But in short, what all of this boils down to is intent. You're looking to figure out what someone plans to do, intends to do, is thinking of doing. Our goat here, well, aside from the fact that he's in a tent, you might wonder, what is he thinking, he or she? I actually have no idea. Is he inside the tent or outside the tent? Is he imagining that pair of socks of yours that he's about to digest? Where is he going next? That's what we're really trying to do, is get some predictive value out of text. Now, the first set of things you can look at to get predictive value out of text is just the words themselves, and Ingo told you more about that than I really had ever intended to do myself. there's a lot of information in words. That sparse high-dimensional space you get to by simply making features out of the words themselves, a great deal of traction in the world takes place by simply applying that. And that's technology you might be able to pick up for yourself and use. I happen to know there are a few people in the room who do that every day, to just take in text, build feature vectors off the words, use SVMs, use the classifier technology, use your favorite classifier technology. If you've got a lot of data, use that Wabbit. And there are many tasks which that problem solves, but not all of them. So, words are really slippery things. And of course, it's the curse of every generation to accuse the generation after it of abusing the language and devaluing the language. In fact, ever since Shakespeare, we've all been doing that to our parents. But nonetheless, this is sort of an accidental shout out to John's talk, I suppose. This is the sort of thing you're looking at if you're looking at text. You're trying to get the voice of the customer. And if you build a frequency of word usage in an effort to get some idea of what people think of something, chances are the word sick will be a negative word. Now, okay, yes, there's a lot of this vernacular floating around the world, but there's not that much of this vernacular floating around the world. Now, I sort of skipped a step here, right? So we asked intent, right? And intent's a big philosophical question. What does someone really want to do? And yeah, people try to make computers answer big philosophical questions, and some of them even get PhDs in the process, but they don't solve a lot of practical problems really fast that way. So we always have to break the problem down and look for something smaller you can actually do. So one thing you can actually do is sentiment. You can try to ask the question, okay, based on the text available to me, what are some people's attitude towards something in the world? And to derive the attitude of a potential customer to this charming piece of clothing is perhaps a little complicated. But the secret to getting it right is to not just look at the individual words, but to have some contextual engagement with it. I'm going to say contextual engagement and feel like I'm sounding completely silly, but to look at the text in a more detailed way, to look at, perhaps to parse the text to some extent, or to look at co-occurrence. We have the word sick here, but look, it's really near the word by, and frankly, people don't usually talk about diseases that close to purchases. But another source of problems here is ambiguity in the world, and so Microsoft's in the news today. So here we have, if you're trying to do the voice of the customer and you're unfortunate enough to have to do that for Microsoft, having to worry about people's attitude towards Microsoft Windows is a pretty sad job anyway. You're looking at text in the world, and here are the sorts of things you're seeing, right? You've got people cleaning Windows, you've got people installing Windows, a little of this and a little of that. How do you tell which is which? Again, word counting, this document has lots of references to Windows, is not going to bring you the right documents if you're really just casting a broad brush. Now, while I'm going to talk about some technology that we have at Basis, which is specifically aimed at this, I will say that the technology I'll describe in a few minutes is not the only approach to this problem. First thing you might do is you might be being, somewhat more selective about which documents you actually look at. This is really important if you're even remotely considering trying to learn something from Twitter. To quote one of my coworkers, 90% of all tweets consist of there's just no content at all. And so if you try to do text analytics on sort of every tweet coming through in some period of time, you're toast. You have to have some ability to down select the tweet stream and get to some tweets that are actually visibly somehow about the subject. And similarly, there are probably some ways of selecting data sources that if you're worried about the computer industry, that you can stay clear of squeegees. But in the end of the day, the purpose of all this stuff is to get from this giant noisy cloud to some nice, neat categories and concepts and things in the world. And that's kind of the intended tagline of this slide, but I'm going to use it to riff in a slightly different direction, which is to come back to this question of taking action. So ultimately, systems that plug into businesses, what they do for a living is they paw through all of your data, and they count a lot of fingers, and they build a model, they classify things, they predict things, and eventually that becomes a signal that tells you to do something. In the customer churn example, what you really want to do is direct the attention of your personnel. You want to be able to say, call this person and offer them 2 free months, because based on what we can predict, based on what other customers have done, it's worth the time and money to spend time calling this person and talking to them. They might actually respond to it. Don't call that person. They just talked to the Comcast guy for 7 hours and they're never coming back. So in the end, what this is all about is generating a signal. We're trying to take all these different pieces of information in the world and boil them down to a signal that either can make an automated system do something, send that email, set off that or make good decisions about deploying human effort, focus people over here, not over there. Now, everyone gets a turn to talk about what they actually do for a living. So one of the things we actually do for a living at Basis is we build technology related to this. Some of the technologies we build fit into some of the bits and pieces that Inga was showing you, but there's this question about whether every time you solve this problem, you want to start at the bottom and start counting words. Some of these things, there's really a value in building some higher level structure, solving a big part of the problem that can be solved once and then recycled. So this is really, I'm going to talk a bit about one of the ways of doing something about those windows. So if you remember, perhaps one of John's slides showed you a situation where there was some text and they'd marked up some diseases in some places. In the jargon, that's name tagging or name identity extraction, finding references to actual things in the world in the text. So you might find a reference, you can look at all of these different ways in which text might reference. I'm pointing down there instead of up here. I'm sorry, but you don't really need me to point at anything. That's all kinds of different ways that Franklin Delano Roosevelt might show up in text, and they're all the same guy. And so if you're trying to get a signal out of the text, you need to bring those all together. And you need to bring those all together without having a large army of underpaid graduate students whom you can put to work manually curating it because they want their degree. Okay, not everyone has that luxury. We had a product once that we built very labor intensively, and the way we described it was, you too can have the Pyramid of Giza in your backyard if you have 100,000 Hebrew slaves in a quarry. That's kind of what it felt like building that one. The Rosetta Entity Resolver is all about doing this work for you, of grouping things together and linking them to the real world. So we've done all the heavy lifting of building statistical models so that when we look at text and find the names, we can not only say, here's a name in the text, but we can tell you, it goes with this Wikipedia page, not that Wikipedia page. And that's already a very strong signal, which you can then build into other analytical structures to solve your particular problem. Now, I'm just going to let this one sit for a moment. I wanted to finish up with 2 thoughts. One of them is the difficult, is just to reiterate just what a pain in the neck human language is. Now, there are 2 reactions you can have to the fact that human language is a pain in the neck. One of them is to stick with words, okay? That is, in fact, a very traditional approach. Some of you may know this, but some of you may not, but machine translation, which people use in the real world every day, is based on the theoretical construct that that person speaking French isn't actually speaking French. They're speaking English, and it's going through a really noisy tier of tin cans and a string. That's really the underlying mathematical model of all modern machine translation. It just takes a lot of computer power to make that seem to be true. So just counting everything, building a model with no actual sort of semantic insight, you can get a long way with that. And that sort of avoids bumping into this charming phenomenon here. But the other way you can kind of look at this is going to lead to my next slide, which is the importance of collaboration in solving these problems, otherwise known as don't try this at home. This stuff, there's some techniques in this field which you can pick up some open source, you can read a book, you can build a classification model, you'll do fine, no problem. And maybe until you need to do it in Turkish or Chinese, okay? But there are other areas of this where there really is value in people who've been there before, systems that have been assembled that know, with prior experience, and that these problems get solved at the collaborative boundary between people who know something about this technology and people who know something about the problem you're trying to solve. And at Basis these days, we're really looking to find more and more opportunities to be engaged with customers and solve their particular problems, because past a certain point, you can't build a software module that just sort of does this by magic. It has to be a collaboration of applying technology to specific problems. And that's my story for tonight.
So just to be fair, I think we'll take 1 or 2 questions from Benson real quick before we break.
Or not, as needed.
You guys hungry?
Or thirsty, more likely.
Very true. Going once, going twice. All right, so listen, we have a fantastic panel lined up for you, coming up very shortly. So we are going to feed you again for a little while, but you only eat if you're staying. If you're not staying, don't touch that. No, no, serious. All right, see you in 15 minutes. Great job, Benson. That was a really... Like that second line.
One of the best jobs of